Hey, welcome back, everyone. We have more spoilers. They are coming fast and furious here. A lot of them are going to be in foreign languages, so we'll do the best we can. I roughly remember them from reading through as I was downloading these images, and most of them have some keywords here. For example, Ocho Mas Cartas. This is going to cost 3 less if you have 8 or more if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. And you're going to gain control of a creature with converted mana cost X or less. So you can steal something that costs 3 or less for 3 under the right circumstances, and you can ramp up more mana. I think this is going to be something that people have fun with in Commander, and it seems like anything that cares about cards in graveyards at this point, as long as Euro's around, I'm pretty skeptical. If you're relying on your opponent not having a full graveyard, I don't know. Seems like an unlikely scenario in the immediate future, for Standard at least. Minecarver, a 1 casting cost piece of equipment. This is our Bone Splitter, I guess, but what a major difference here. It gets +1/+0, but it gets +3/+1 as long as the opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard. So late game, this is much, much better in terms of coming down and attaching to a creature, but it's not something that you can pass back and forth like a hot potato, turning your 1/1 tokens into formidable things to be traded with during combat. I mean, it's fine. You can't compare everything to Bone Splitter. It's one of the better pieces of equipment ever made, and from the first set that they did equipment. So they've definitely tried to figure out how to make things not as ridiculous, and we'll see how this one ends up being. I mean, for 1 black mana, giving a creature +3/+1 permanently, and being able to pass it off later is definitely high quality, and the 3 equip cost pairs much more efficiently with a 3 power boost compared to just getting +1/+0. So late game could be better, but I'm skeptical about those 8 cards in the graveyard for a limited game. Cleansing Wildfire. This is a fascinating reprint, or fascinating printing, I should say, especially for Pauper. So destroy a land, and its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle their library, draw a card. Watch out for this. Decks that are not running basic lands, this has your number. This is incredibly dangerous versus decks like a Tron deck, not running basics. It's not going to enjoy playing against this at all. Neither is really any type of strategy that just doesn't play basics, as long as you're not talking, I mean, maybe something like Delver wouldn't care as much because they're potentially committing to the board, but in general, I mean, if they don't have any non-basic lands to grab, this card is incredibly good. Cascade Seer. Also, there are ways to make it so your opponent can't search through their library, like Leonin something or other, where they have to pay 2 in order to search. So the card's spicy. Cascade Seer, 4 mana for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, scry X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. You're going to get at least a scry out of this, because it is a wizard, unless, of course, they just kill all of your creatures in response, in which case, no scry for you. But overall, pretty solid limited card, I would say. Seagate Colossus, a 7/5 for 7. However, it's going to cost 1 less for each creature in your party, so potentially, we'll look at the Christmas Land scenario on a lot of these. Magical Christmas Land, it's a 3 mana 7/5 artifact creature, which also happens to be a warrior. Sure-Footed Infiltrator, 4 mana for a 2/3. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card, and you can also tap another untapped rogue you control to make it unblockable. I'm actually pretty okay with this card in Limited. Being able to continually outdraw your opponent 2 for 1, that's generally going to lead to a W. So I actually like this card. Despite the power to mana cost issue, I can definitely see holding down the fort with some good removal if there's some in the set, and riding that guy to victory. Goma Fada Vanguard, a human warrior, 2/2 for 2, to where the curve can begin for most sealed decks. Whenever it attacks, target creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block this turn. Turns them into cowards, basically, and that is, I think, a quality limited card right there, worthy of being an uncommon. In my experience, uncommons are really what win those pre-releases and sealed decks. When you've got strong uncommons with good synergy, you're going to kind of draw a lot more of those than your bomb rare. There are a few formats where that wasn't the case. But for the most part, a great sealed pool full of uncommons ends up beating a pool that is just relying on some top-end rares. Angel of Destiny. This is a super dangerous card. My goodness, 5 casting costs for a 2/6, giant backside, but it's got double strike. So, yeah, it's kind of like a 4-power creature, but let's be real, there's equipment in this set too, so not unusual for something like this to pick something up and hit twice as hard because of it. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player gain that much life. So you're basically gaining a ton of life, and then at the beginning of your end step, if you have 15 or more than your starting life total, each player, Angel of Destiny, attack this turn loses the game. So like a really complicated way around to kind of help out the life gain. And it's just a really interesting card. We'll see how good it ends up being. Totally possible it's a trap. It's also totally possible that this is just going to be a very difficult to handle win condition. We will see. I don't know intuitively from looking at this. To an extent, it makes all of your creatures kind of lifelink for both of you. So attacking them is going to gain you life, but then they gain the life right back. So very interesting card. You're really all in on her ability to win the game at that point. But yeah, I dig it. I think it's fun. And let me know what you think about this one in the comments. Is it just too much work to win a game? I mean, there are plenty of ways to win in Magic. I think we actually have the English version of this guy later. This one, we don't have the English version. This does a bunch of stuff. We got +1, 2+1/+1 counters, or so you gain 3 life, I think is the other one. Let me see if I can see it on the... We'll just get it for you directly instead of me trying to decipher Korean. This one is called... Well, they're just calling it Green D20 on Scryfall. But you get 2 counters. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures that player controls. And target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. If you kicked, you can actually choose any number of those options. Otherwise, you're getting 1. And that is pretty reasonable. That is totally fine for limited. Fighting for 2 mana at instant speed. Nothing to sneeze at. There is Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. We saw the other version before. This is a full art treatment, kind of cropped in a little bit. Costs 1 less for each creature in your party, so, you know, it's going to be a 2/2, a 2 casting cost 4/4 at some point in history, or in the future, I should say. Other creatures you control have Death Touch, and also, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a Planeswalker, destroy that Planeswalker. So, Death Touch for Planeswalkers and creatures for all of your creatures, and a 4/4 flyer with haste to boot. This guy is going to be very good in sealed pools. We've got a 1/2 for 1 in a green. Now, I think we've seen this card in one of the previous core sets. Maybe core I think M15. They had a green elf that you could pay 4 and a white to give your whole team +1/+1. And it was pretty good in my experience. Now, granted, that format had a lot of help with like triplicate spirits and like a bunch of like excellent token generation. But we'll see if this ends up being good. Mana sinks and limited can be very beneficial. That's pretty much the only place I see something like that seeing play. 1 and a blue here for a 1/3. Whenever it blocks a creature, goes to sleep, doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. We have here, this one is really exciting. 3 and a green for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. That is a big body, and probably not as good as Elvish Visionary, or Llanowar Visionary, the 3 casting cost 2/2 that also taps for green. That card's just hot sauce. But this one replaces itself. It's 3 power. If you're trading up with like a 4/3 or a 5/3, I mean, you're winning. Like, that is very, very strong. And 2-for-1s are great. So I'm down with that card. I don't know if I can express how big a deal this is to us old school Magic players to see this type of card made. Some people are going to actually hate this. Feed the Swarm for 1 in the black. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. Black has always struggled with enchantments. That was the whole idea from the beginning of the game. You had stuff like Circle of Protection Red and Karma, or Circle of Protection Black and Karma. Just these brutal enchantments that Black just needed to either use other colors or something like a Nevral's Disc to blow up the whole world. And instead now, in Black, this card can destroy enchantments. Expect this to be a commander card for Black decks everywhere to finally handle those pesky enchantments. Let me know what you think about this card. Do you like it? Do you think this just craps all over the concept of the color pie? I mean, if they don't do it too much, there's a little bit of an allure there. We've seen white get counter spells, and people do tend to love that. But they usually are a lot more of a drawback than just losing some life, especially when you take it in the context of Commander, where, 40 life format, losing some life to destroy an enchantment is going to be quite the bargain. Highborn Vampire, this 4-power, 4/3 with 0 abilities other than being a warrior, is probably going to be fine. Just for sealed. Angel Heart Protector, a 3 casting cost 2/3 when it enters the battlefield. Target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn, is a big tempo play. Being able to turn something sideways and essentially make it unblockable is usually how that kind of feels in the early game. You'll have some like that 4/3 where you're just going to be able to make it indestructible and turn it sideways. They're either going to block it and lose a guy, or they're just going to take the 4. More often than not, they're just going to eat some damage early. Fissure Wizard. That is probably going to be difficult to say 7 times fast. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. I like it for limited. Looting, getting rid of excess lands, very often going to be good. If you don't have a strong landfall component, cycling those extra lands is going to be super important. And the jury's still out on how much landfall there's going to be here, so it's totally possible. Certainly in draft, there's going to be decks that don't care about landfall at all, and you're just going to be happy to loot and cycle through, get to the good stuff while discarding your lands. Relic Robber, this 3 casting cost 2/2 rare, has haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless goblin construct artifact creature with this creature can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, it does 1 damage to you. So basically, you are handing over every time you hit them this 1 damage per turn artifact, which the next turn it's going to be taking 2. So if your opponent can make use of those artifacts, that's going to go disastrously, which is exactly what you'd expect out of goblins. I mean, they're going to have some plans. It's not going to be well thought through. Sometimes it's going to blow up in their face. ATOGs are going to be very, very comfortable with that exchange. Crawling Baron, going to tap for a colorless. These lands often end up seeing play in Commander. Of course, there are plenty of colorless Commander deck options, but here you can also pay 4 to put 2 +1/+1 counters on Crawling Barons. Then you may have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So this is like a infinite mana sink in Commander. This is something that you can just keep pumping mana into it. This card would not be shocking at all to be a constructed quality card in my estimation. Something like Standard could easily have something like this. Just keep dumping counters on it each end step until it's eventually big enough to just completely take out the opponent. Let's see, do we have an English version of this? We do not. So this one is Landfall. You're going to exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card this turn, and then at the end of turn, does it say without mana costs? No, I think you can just play it. At the end of turn, you discard all, although those cards get exiled, instead they go to your graveyard, and then they take damage equal to that number. So if you use it, great. If not, you start hitting your opponent. Skyclave Geoped. This guy's pretty scary. I am not going to lie. A trampling 3/1 for 3 is a little overcosted, but playable. But landfall, giving it +2/+2, man, that pairs really viciously with this trample. You can potentially be pumping this guy up to 7 power very easily, making blocking him a nightmare, and also not blocking him a very scary proposition. So this guy, I think, is going to be very good in limited. Red, green, or anything that can make those extra land drops is going to be pretty interesting. I don't know what the real name of this card is going to be, but this Yasharn, as it's currently worded, so it's a 4/4 for 4, and I'm going to check the text. It is pretty brutal. As I remember it, you get to search for a forest and a plains, and then players may not activate or cast spells that require, it says players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So mercifully, it has non-land permanents, so that you can still use your fetch lands. That would have been absolutely savage. But your Force of Will's getting shut off. You're sacrificing non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So things like Atog, for example, are going to get shut down with this. Very interesting card. And, I mean, it's a 4/4 for 4 that gets some card advantage. I'd be totally fine playing this card in limited, and it feels to me like the type of thing that could see play in constructed as well, just being card advantage, reasonably costed, and having an upside that could potentially be an answer to certain parts of the meta. Seagate Stormcaller, this 2 casting cost, 2/1 human wizard. When it enters the battlefield, you copy the next instant or sorcery with converted mana cost 2 or less that you cast this turn, and if it was kicked, then you copy it twice. When I see cards like this, I just think about like Time Walk and Regrowth. I expect this card to be totally fine and likely to be good in Commander. Feels like the type of thing that could be fine in Constructed for a variety of reasons, and yeah, I'll be surprised if it's not decent. It's certainly decent enough for Commander. Copying spells is pretty good, and I mean, I know it can't copy Time Walk there, but there's a bunch of good instants and sorceries that you'd be pretty happy to copy. Archon of Emeria, I'm glad it costs at least 3. Each player can't cost more than 1 spell each turn. Doesn't say anything about creatures, so just any spells at all. Doesn't say anything about artifacts, so there's no way around this. And then non-basic lands your opponent control enter the battlefield tapped. Those are 2 hateful lines of text. It's also a 2/3 flyer for 3. We'll see if it's good enough for death and taxes. I mean, every single white creature that gets spoiled is always, the butterfly meme. Is this a new death and taxes creature? I mean, probably not, but like it totally seems like it could be. I think the exiling the permanents that cost 4 or less one might be better, but this one's pretty hateful. It's just a little slow is really the only drawback here. Is this one is a bit slow. Song Mad Treachery, 5 casting costs for a card that usually costs 3. I mean, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap it, it gains haste. We've seen it a million times at 3 mana. Sometimes we've seen upsides tacked onto a 3 mana version. The upside on this is you can bail on it and play it as a tapped land, getting a red mana. I mean, we'll see how this shakes out. First brush, I don't generally love this effect at 5 mana. Feels too expensive to me. Of course, if there's good sack outlets or other synergy, could change that, but overall, I feel like this one's going to be just too highly costed. Vastwood Surge, 4 casting costs, and you have an option of a kicker to go up to 8 mana. You search a library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then if you kicked it, then +1/+1 counter, 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Wow. All right. I mean, that's a hell of a kicker. If the spell was kicked, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. I mean, 8 mana, that is probably going to make the first half of the card largely irrelevant, searching for the 2 basic lands. I guess maybe you'll have some landfall triggers, to be fair, but like you're probably not going to need to use that mana. You're probably going to get a couple of landfall triggers and then KO your opponent. at 8 mana. So that one's going to be a dangerous card in limited for sure. Roiling Regrowth, 3 mana, sack a land. This is Harrow, except not as an additional cost. And I'm kind of glad to see it, honestly. Like, Harrow had one of the grossest interactions that I've really heard about in Magic back in the day. I mean, people don't understand how much effort has gone into changing the culture of tournament Magic, and just kind of how brutal it was when I was playing and like very, very competitive. There was a tournament where somebody played Harrow, sacked their land, put Harrow in the graveyard, and then picked up their library to go get the 2 lands. And their opponent called the judge over and pretended to be confused and be like, what are you doing? Like, you played Harrow, you failed to find, and why are you looking in your library? Like, Harrow's in the graveyard, it's already resolved. If you were resolving Harrow, it would be on the stack. So, like, how can you justify picking up your library? That wouldn't fly these days. Now, you could gently remind somebody that the spell stays on the stack until it resolves, but, like, the idea of, like, trying to cheese somebody out of getting the 2 lands just because they put their Harrow in the graveyard before resolving the spell is a tough thing to swallow in terms of the culture nowadays. And that was fairly normal back then. That was just kind of a thing that would happen in tournaments. People played as hard as they possibly could and looked for any possible edge. If you made a mistake, that was going to be the difference between winning and losing. And people were glad that you were making the mistake instead of them. And you know what? Roiling Regrowth avoids that altogether. So, well, I guess it avoids the first half of sacking a land and getting nothing. I guess you could still make the same argument here that they decided to search for 0, but it's not going to fly nowadays. Adventure Awaits, 2 mana, and talk about getting rid of feel bads. Look at the top 5 of your library. You can get a creature, put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. If you didn't put a creature, then you can draw a card. So that is completely eliminating the feel bads of these type of cards. Usually, you play something like this. Now, often they say, take a look and get all of the cards. So we've got like Winding Ways and stuff, which you can say name creature, and you could potentially get 4 creatures off of it. But here, you'll never whiff. And yeah, I mean, that's nice. I feel like they were trying to think about what makes players feel bad when playing Magic. And certainly when you play a card like this and you whiff, it feels awful. So, nice. Real nice. Let's see here. 5 casting costs to give all your creatures +2/+2 until end of turn. And that can also come in as a land tapping for white. Again, a little overcosted, not the worst in the world. Let's see. I actually don't know what Conjuro is, if it's instant or sorcery. Feels like a sorcery. Just going to check here on Scryfall quickly for you guys. It is indeed a sorcery. There we go. Bubble Snare, 1 blue, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you tap the creature, and enchanted creature doesn't untap during its untap step. So, pretty good removal. 1 blue, just slap that on a creature, and it doesn't untap. Generally, you're going to be doing it on creatures that have been attacking you. They're already tapped when you play it. And the fact that you can potentially clear a blocker and keep it out of the way, I mean, I think this is some premium removal as far as what we've seen. I mean, there hasn't been a ton of it so far, so I actually like this card at 1 blue. I mean, I'm a fan. Broken Wings, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. And I don't know if this is a reprint or not. It might be a functional reprint as well. Tough for me to say. I don't think it is. That said, I do like the fact that this can take out a creature with flying, which is great, but then also have the option versus just a ground and pound deck with no flyers to at least have some utility, blow up an enchantment or an artifact. There's equipment in this set. This could be a main deckable card, whereas Plummet, where it's just 2 mana to destroy a creature with flying, generally isn't main deckable in any type of really serious format when you're doing sealed or draft. I mean, it's pretty rare that you're actually going to get away with that. If you run up against a deck that's really good and doesn't have creatures with flying, you're just going to get absolutely wrecked game one when it's stuck in your hand. So this one I like. I think it seems like they're addressing some feel bads that can happen in Magic with this, and the making sure you don't whiff. So that's it for today. We got through quite a lot here. What are we coming up on? 25 minutes. So let me know if these videos are too long for you guys or a decent length. I enjoy making them. I actually like going through and seeing the cards for the first time here and giving my thoughts with my my first impressions on them. And I'll be a little bit more prepared for the pre-release as well. You can always help out the store with our website. I know a lot of people ask, like, what can they do to help? It's like, yeah, I mean, you can just buy stuff from us. It's all good. That's what we do. And I will get this stuff up ASAP for pre-order. So Zendikar Rising has so much. We've got set boosters and booster boxes and collector boosters. I'm just waiting to hear back my final allocation numbers before I put that up there. I don't want to oversell. I think with these box toppers, this set is going to be just super, super hot. And the original Zendikar actually put a lot of stores out of business. That was one of the first disasters that I witnessed in the gaming industry. That was just like a bloodbath. And what happened was a lot of people took pre-orders and then they found out about the hidden treasures. And what ended up happening was people couldn't get the boxes that they thought they'd be able to. A store that used to order 100 boxes was told that they were only getting 70, or even if you were normally able to get 100, maybe you pre-sold 200. Whatever the case was, whoever was to blame, doesn't really matter. The reality of the situation was these stores could not cover their pre-orders, and because there was such mania to get that first edition printing, we actually saw people going back to the stores demanding their money back because they weren't going to be able to get the product opening weekend. And also when they finally would get the product, it wouldn't be that first edition run. So they wanted their money. They were going to go try and get it from someplace else. And you know what? A lot of the times when stores get in that money, they take a look around and they say, what can I do to fix this place up? And they invest the money into their business. And it was just a disaster. You couldn't get, if you bought new shelving or new carpets or whatever you were buying, it's not like you can just sell that stuff, get your money back, and hand it back to the customers. So I'm very cautious. I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I mean, that's my current plan. I've been doing it for 25 years. I want to do it as long as I want to keep doing it. Let's go with that. And in order to do that, I am just very, very cautious. So when it comes to pre-orders, we'll make sure if I take your pre-order, I'm getting you the product. And sometimes that means it's going to be a little bit slower before I can start accepting those orders. If you do want to support the store and you want to have a little bit of patience for those orders to be available, I appreciate your patience. And of course, I appreciate all of the support. Thanks for watching, guys. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.